Welcome. Welcome to New Life Downtown's Commons space in downtown. Really excited for those of you who have a chance to be in the room with us. Also want to make sure that I acknowledge a handful of folks that are watching online, and thanks to D11 for kind of having their Go team, their technology team ready to stream an event like this so that people who couldn't make it to the room can still be a part of the conversation. Also want to say thanks to New Life Downtown for making a space available. And for those of you guys who did come down here for braving the parking and trying to figure out how to navigate your way around downtown if you don't do so a lot. I'm around downtown a lot, and so I was prepared for the parking. I think for some of us, if you're not around downtown a lot in the middle of the day, at least can be a challenge finding a spot. So here's what today is. First of all, my name is Stu Davis. For those of you guys that I haven't had a chance to meet, I'm the director of an organization here in town called COSILOVEYOU. Some people say it COS I love you. Either way you say it. One of the things that we say a lot is as schools go, communities go. And if you think about it, that is very true. And don't take my word for it. There's a lot of research out there that says the same. And as an organization, one of the things that we try to do is to build supportive teams around local schools. Some of you are from churches or organizations who do that with us. And one of the things that we try to accomplish is advancing a school's mission by building teams of churches and businesses and nonprofits and even neighbors and friends who want to be a part of helping their neighborhood school and those families get better, achieve more, and have a brighter outlook in their community. So one of the reasons that we are here today is to help you get some information about something that's really very important for those of us, which is all of us in this room, who are involved with a D11 school. I won't steal any of Dr. Thomas's thunder. I'll introduce him in just a moment. But as we all know, our city is growing. There's a lot of things that come with a growing city, some of which are really great and some of which are hard or just create some pressure points. And we're at one of those pressure points with not just D11, but with a number of our school districts. But D11 being amongst our larger school districts, there's a lot of things that are shifting and that are changing, and we need to figure out ways to shift and change with it and allow many of these families, thousands of kids, tens of thousands of kids in our community continue to have access to a quality education. So I'm going to introduce you to two people. The first is not going to be up here for very long, and then I'll introduce Dr. Thomas. Sean Golickson is back here in the back of the room. Sean is the president of the Board of Education for School District 11. He's also the president of Vector Bank here in Colorado Springs. Oftentimes it's difficult to know which is his paying job and which is his non-paying job because he probably spends equal time amongst both. But Sean spends a lot of time helping to work on something. Sean, could I just ask you to come up? I just want to ask you one question as a way of just kind of teeing up why we're here. You and I were on the phone not that long ago, and you made a very stark comment. You said if we don't make some changes, essentially if we don't do what is on the table for us to do this fall, the community should fire you and the rest of the board. That's a pretty stark comment. What do you mean, Sean, when you say something like that?
Well, thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it. And first, thank you guys for having us here and joining us for this information. I have a feeling you're going to hear some pretty exciting things. And to tee that up, the reason I had given that answer to you, Stu, was we knew that there was a problem in our district. We knew that our facilities were deteriorating. We knew that we were spending a lot of money to put patchwork into our buildings that we would just turn around and have to spend money on again. And so being a banker, by some days, mostly, fiscal responsibility is very important to me. It's very important to our board and our district. And as we looked out at our facilities and our footprint, we realized we were spending money that we really shouldn't be. And we had to create a plan to address that problem within our district and to reinvest in our facilities so that we weren't constantly spending our taxpayer money to put on these Band-Aids, whether that be a furnace, flooding that happened because of old pipes, whatever the case may be, we knew there were problems. And to ignore that would be an incredible disservice to our students and to our community and to the real estate, because as you'd mentioned, strong neighborhoods need strong schools. And a strong school and a good facility are the conditions for our students to thrive and be successful, which would lead us into our academics and our master plan that you'll hear about today too. So absolutely, if we did nothing, knowing that there was a problem, and we were irresponsible fiscally with your tax money, you should not elect us. However, I will say that you do have a board that is willing to make the tough decisions. You have a superintendent who is willing to lead through tough decisions, and we're doing the work. And it's incredible work. It's incredibly important, and we're really excited to do that for our community. So thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. Now I'll just get off the microphone and introduce Dr. Michael Thomas is the superintendent for School District 11. You're in this room because you're working alongside a D11 school. That's why you're here. Perhaps you've had a chance to interact with Dr. Thomas before. If you've not, he's coming into the beginning of his 4th year as the superintendent here for School District 11. Came here from Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I'll just say this. Over the last 4 years, 3.5 years now that I've gotten to know Dr. Thomas, I never leave a conversation unimpressed. The opposite is true. I always leave impressed with his depth of character, with the size of his vision, with the readiness with which he embraced Colorado Springs as his hometown. And so regardless of kind of your thoughts on a ballot issue, a bond issue, or whatever it might be, I do hope that you'll give Dr. Thomas some real attention, because he's put a lot of thought and time and effort into not only preparing his team for a difficult season ahead, but to making sure that D11 is, at least in the opinion of his board and the rest of the leaders at D11, is well positioned to grow with Colorado Springs. So, Dr. Thomas, come on up. Thanks again for the opportunity to be able to be here.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Stu. Good afternoon, everyone. Stu, is this you? I think that's you. Yep. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. And like Stu said, it's great to be here. There's only one correction I'll make, and the people in my hometown understand this. I actually am from St. Paul, not Minneapolis. It's our little friendly. It's like saying I'm from Denver versus Colorado Springs, right? But no, joking aside, yeah, born and raised in the Twin Cities, and it's great to be here. I don't miss the snow, don't miss the humidity or the mosquitoes, which is our other state bird. Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do here in Colorado. This is a prime opportunity, and I share with folks, I've never been in a place where a city is going through its new life cycle while a district is going through its new life cycle. These parallel tracks are probably not even really, they're probably the same track, as we've talked about. Strong schools equal strong communities, and where you have strong communities, you're going to see strong schools. And that's what we're committed to in District 11. As one of the 4 core, as I affectionately call D20, D2, D49, and D11, you know, we make up kind of the metro area of Colorado Springs, totaling probably over 100,000 students and families. That's a large amount of folks. And I can tell you on behalf of my superintendent colleagues in the southern region, you know, these past 15, 18 months have been a whirlwind. We've learned a lot, and as I was sharing, I just want to say we got an A. We don't need that lesson again, right? We're done with that. But it really did help put some things into perspective. You know, for myself, I've always known schools were hubs for communities. You know, whether it's my professional role or as a parent, you know, when my kids were in school, we knew that. I think we took it for granted. But COVID, I think, put a new light of reality on many of us for a lot of things that are probably values or priorities that should have been, that we just maybe took for granted. I think schools is one of them. And we want to make sure that as a district, you know, the Center City District of Colorado Springs, the name moniker District of Colorado Springs, we want to be that vibrant value-add school system and that premier district of choice. And that's what we're committed to. And we know that there are 16 other school districts doing the same thing. I believe in an educated populace. We know that families move around the city because we're a choice state. But we also want to make sure that we have an opportunity to provide the best service to our families here in District 11. And we don't do this alone. Those of you who are here, and again, those of you who are watching online as well, you know, this is the community's district. And we have said that from day one of me being here. And it's been very, very important to me as your superintendent to make sure that we lead in ways that these are the community's schools, not Michael's school. Very, very important. And so as we embark on the 3 R's, which we affectionately used to know as reading, writing, arithmetic, it is now our rebuilding, reimagining, and rediscovering District 11. And, you know, we didn't know 3 years ago when we started laying the foundations for this campaign that COVID would be a part of our reality. But I'm so grateful, and I think it is a testament to our school board to have a supportive vision for change in K-12 education, that when I came in here, they said, Michael, we've been losing, 700 or so students a year for the past 10 plus years. We've got to stop that. We've got to find ways to bring, folks back, because the city is growing and we want to be an attractive option for families. So we started this 3 years ago. And, when COVID came, it definitely shifted our focus temporarily to really, lead through a really challenging crisis. But we never lost sight of the seeds we planted 3 years ago. And they have already started taking effect. For us to come out of COVID, we have a very strong foundation. Some of our other colleagues are kind of doing some catch-up now because they've been in that reactionary mode, because that's not where they've been for the past several years. So I'm excited to share a little bit about where we're going as a district, and also where there are continued opportunities, and probably even more so, the importance of true collaborative partnerships with not only our faith-based community, but every aspect of our community. Like I said, these are the community's schools. Our mission in District 11 is that we dare to empower the whole student to profoundly impact this world. And that's what we want our students to leave with, prepared to do. Don't just get out there in the world, get out there in the world. Show yourself, shine. Let them know you're from D11. How many of you are D11 graduates? A couple of you, okay. How many of you have touch points to D11, like maybe grandkids or neighbors, okay? Yeah, right, schools clearly are preparing our students to make some great changes in the world, and we're excited to talk a little bit about that here today. Talked a little bit about our mission, but this is more than just words on a paper, folks. And I always tell folks, when we did our strategic plan, we had nearly 2,000 touch points from our community develop this plan. This is the community's strategic plan. And it was, actually this is where I met Stu. And again, equally, the words that he spoke each day that we were there were just profound. And it's this is somebody who understands the intersections of K-12 and the broader community. And we want that kind of impact happening for our students. And we will become this strategic plan. This is something that we do. It's not just a shelf document that looks pretty, on a bookshelf. And so for the past couple of years, we've been setting out this plan to redesign District 11. And that is our facilities, what you shop with your eyes, as well as our core academics. And those two together will allow us to be that premier district, that district of choice. And you need both. And folks, we used to be the largest district and the oldest district. Now we're just the oldest district. I think we're the third largest. But our facilities are starting to show it, okay? And I don't know if any of you have been to the West Campus, and I always use this story, but when I first came here and I'm just touring schools, my first visit to West, literally minutes upon entering West, I had just people flocking. Don't close our school, don't close it. We know that this school is the oldest school and it needs a lot of repair, but don't close our school. I'm just coming to say hello, introduce myself, I'm not closing schools. It's my first week. But what they're saying is these schools mean something to this community, right? There's a legacy here, there's a history here, and we know that, and we know that to be true. But to President Golickson's point, we also need to be good stewards of our resources, whether it's financial resources or capital resources. These are investments for this community for the next 150 years that we want to make sure are around and fully functional. So we are going to have to address that. Equally, again, I think COVID really exacerbated this, but I always tell this joke, how many educators does it take to change a light bulb? What? Change? Okay? K-12 as an industry is one of the slowest moving industries I've ever experienced, but one of the largest systems in this country, okay? And changing in K-12 can be very painful, builds up those pressure points. But we have to be change agents in K-12 education. If we become stagnant, we'll become irrelevant, and we are not going to be graduating folks who are ready to compete globally. So we have to be able to make sure that our core academics, are meeting the demand of our community and in workspaces, as well as preparing kids for their lifelong dreams. So I won't read everything to you on these slides, and we'll certainly, I think this is on our website as well, so you can have copies of that, but I'll go through a couple of key areas. So when we think about our academic opportunities, one of the first things I always want to make sure of, and we're kind of talking about some of this column here, is quality neighborhood schools. I don't want any family to feel as though they need to go all the way across town to get, quote unquote, a quality education, right? Every family should have access to a school with solid core academic programming happening in there. Fourth grade math curriculum looks the same at Trailblazer as it does at Monroe, okay? It's the exact same curriculum. We need to make sure that families understand that. And we also know that many of our families are looking for some unique opportunities for their student. Could be their learning style, could be their personal interests. And so we know that we're gonna have to have some type of unique academic pathways that are some choices for families that they can exercise. And you know, I use the analogy of an ice cream cone, like everybody should get a base scoop of vanilla. But if you want sprinkles and you want caramel and you want peanuts, we can coordinate some of that, but we don't have infinite toppings. We can't afford that, right? But we talked with our community and we understood these are the areas of uniqueness that they would like us to coordinate. And we did this pre-COVID. So obviously STEM, this is one of the fastest growing industries right now as we speak, particularly here with the cybersecurity boom and you know, space agencies and everything coming here. I'm going to be kind of saying we're going to get more, but you know, we know that that's going to be a high demand, okay, of industry. CTE, right now D11 probably has the most robust CTE offerings in the entire state of Colorado. It is probably our flagship academic pathway. Visual and performing arts is an area of interest to our families. Dual language immersion programs. District 11 is one of the most diverse districts in the region. We have about 50% students of color and about 50% white students enrolled in our district, roughly. Of the 50% students of color, about 35% of them are Spanish-speaking families, okay? We have nothing targeting, our linguistic diversity here in our district in a very intentional way. This fall, we're excited to be opening up our first dual language immersion program that will pathway eventually all the way up through Mitchell High School, where kids will graduate bilingual and biliterate and have bilingual seals on their diploma. Again, America is one of the few countries that graduate a majority of their students monolingually compared to other countries around the world that are graduating with 2 to 3 different languages. And then lastly, no surprise, given where we're located, outdoor environmental education, another pathway that families really are resonating and are looking for opportunities. Now again, these will be very specific pathways, but you will find elements of these also in a lot of our curricula throughout the district. But if you want to go into a STEM pathway, if you want to play violin starting in kindergarten and graduate, as a master violinist, we'll have some of those VPA pathways specifically for those interests. And then lastly, the long-term aspect of this is equitable access. And I always talk about this as an example. When I first moved here, understanding the district, for years we've been running a gifted magnet program, okay? And you might hear the acronym GMP. And if your student was identified as gifted, they would be eligible to enroll in a GMP pathway. And we never provided transportation. So if you were a family who was, let's say, in the southeast area of our district and your student was identified as gifted and you struggled with transportation, your student would be underserved. That's an example of a structural inequity, and that's an example of one that we ourselves created as a district. So when we talk about equity, which is a buzz term right now, has been for a while, I want folks to understand, just simply put, equity means giving students what they need to be successful. And what I need versus what you might need versus what you might need will be different. So think about, personalized, individualized instruction, individual learning plans, that concept. That's an equitable process to ensuring kids are getting what they need to be successful. You can't give them the same thing, right? So that's just one example of where equity is kind of flowing through every aspect of what we do here in District 11. And our board, 2 years ago, passed the first equity policy in the southern region. I think it might even be in the state. And I know, and I'm just going to kind of name some other things that are happening. We know that there's a very big politic going on right now with equity or diversity, equity, inclusion, and CRT and all that. Okay, that's a big conversation. There's a lot of politics involved with that. That is not where District 11 is engaging. We understand the importance of being culturally responsive, and culture is broadly defined. Whether, it's my learning style, because I need special support, whether it's my language, whether, it's, my background. We are a public school system, and we take you as you are, how you show up, whomever you are. Everyone's welcome in District 11, and that's critically important for our community to understand. That's our platform in District 11, and that's a non-negotiable for us. When we look at some aspects of going into a new direction, again, we want to make sure that we are going to be a prime competitor. Again, 16 school districts in Colorado Springs, 4 in the immediate metro. But that's a lot of choice, and I'm used to coming from a single city with a single district. So when I learned that there was 15 more, I thought, wow, that's different. But nonetheless, that's our reality. But we want to make sure that we are committing resources to ensure that we take care of our school brick and mortar, and we're taking care of the academic frameworks. We know that we're going to need to modernize our infrastructure. One of the things that we've learned through COVID, and we're doing it today, the days of going back to sit in one single classroom and you're learning, those days are done, right? I think we will forever find ourselves in K-12 education with some levels of hybrid happening. I kind of somewhat jokingly, asked some of our high school principals, so when you think about suspensions, will students ever be suspended anymore, or will they just have to log in virtually when they're at home versus playing Xbox? It's a rhetorical question for them to answer, I guess. But, again, thinking about the realities of engaging students, we now have outfitted every single one of our students with access to a device as well as Wi-Fi connectivity. So we are a true one-to-one. Our board has committed resources to maintain and replenish those devices in our annual budget. So D11 is a full one-to-one school system right now, from pre-K all the way up to high school. We also know that the days of online learning are going to expand. CDE is getting tons of applications for online schools. District 11 also was just recently approved by the State Board of Education for Spark Online Academy. And it's not necessarily about COVID. It's about students who engaged differently and thrived in that virtual environment compared to being in person. So we know that we're going to have to offer that. So we're excited to announce Spark Online Academy is opening this fall as a K-8 opportunity, and then with a future of growing into the high school. So again, modernizing and innovation is something that COVID, I think, has really accelerated and has finally given K-12 the push to take that first step, right, of a journey of 1,000 miles or 1,000 steps or whatever they say. And then again, to become that premier district, this city is growing at a very, very rapid rate. And we know that as more business comes into Colorado Springs, more families are coming into Colorado Springs. We are seeing in demographer reports, we have more students living in D11 than the history that we've ever had, living in the D11 boundary. We have been named, as many of you know, Colorado Springs as one of the #1 destination cities to live in by multiple magazines of that nature. #1 spot for millennials to move into. I don't know how they're going to afford it, but it's the #1 spot for millennials, right? So we're getting a huge influx. What we're also finding with the demographers is that, and this is more of the millennials, is they're delaying childbirths. So we're seeing more and more families having their first kids, late 30s, and thanks to Janet Jackson, into 40, right? So their careers are their babies. And they're putting a lot of emphasis there. And what we're seeing is that as they're nurturing their careers, so are they looking for those school alignments to what they've been nurturing for all this time professionally. So take Palmer right down the street. As the business community and the condos go up, how are we aligning the academic framework of Palmer to ensure that we are meeting the demands that will come when, babies start coming? Put 2 adults together long enough, you're going to get a baby. So we know our birth rates will continue to rise, and that we're going to have more families coming into District 11, and they're looking for that parallel interest of their family in those school systems. Years ago, think about when Colorado Springs was first founded, and you've seen some of those black and white pictures that I've seen as well, about 10 little huts, it looks like, across the prairie. And that's how the city was built. I was told, and I don't know if this is completely accurate, but Colorado Springs was never supposed to be a residential city. It was kind of built to be a destination city, and that you would live elsewhere and this would just be a tourist spot. But obviously that has changed. But when schools were built, when the city was forming, you had a school every couple thousand feet. Right? And schools are very small, quaint, and that's how many of the D11 schools, particularly in the downtown area where we encompass the majority of our district, this is a typical kind of outdated model of what is happening. We have a lot of small schools which are very old, and we have high facility indices, so the higher to 100%, the worse condition that building is in. And these are some of the averages that you're seeing with some of them around. Again, you might think that they're appealing as you drive past, but there's a lot of things that are going into that FCI to say it might not be financially wise to put money into it versus to completely start over, okay? And so we're having to have those conversations. And do we really need 2 schools just a couple of thousand feet away in today's economy, not like financial economy, but like our community? That's the pressure point conversations that we're having right now. Some other examples. I talked about West. If you know West, this used to be a really cool bike jump sidewalk. It was like this. These are the challenges that we've had on some of our campuses. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of these campuses, but again, very high indices in terms of repairing. And we've got to find ways that, within close proximity, can we be more efficient with our capital resources in building somewhat larger schools so that we can maybe perhaps merge 2 schools together for a much more cost-efficient campus and building a broader community at the same time. Last one here, again, we have Edison, Scott, and Audubon, again, all within a half mile radius of one another. Again, the definition of community has changed in 150 years that we've been around, roughly. So we are rethinking how we need to build schools. Given our current enrollment, we have more real estate than we technically need. But we also know in the past, when we've had these conversations with our community, we mistakenly backed ourselves into a corner. And we lost facilities that we needed because we know we see things go in cycles, ebbs and flows. We also know that we need to still have a good return to the community. So let's just say there's a school that is so outdated, it's so costly to repair. Is that an opportunity that we can work with a partnering agency to essentially sell it for pennies on the dollar, and then they can create a child care center? Or the coveted green space that we lack so much of, is that an opportunity for us to work with Park and Rec to donate space to then create a community space, which then could double as an environmental classroom for District 11 during the traditional school hours? These are the innovative things that we are thinking about, that we want to make sure that we're going to our community to engage you as partners to say, if these are some of the realities that we have to contend with, what are some of the best scenarios that we can be considering as we bring recommendations to our board? And again, all of these recommendations will outlive every one of us in this room, right? 100 years from now, we want the next group of folks coming together and say, wow, thank you for that. And given where we've changed in the 100 years, here's our next new life cycle, right? So how do we do this? Well, the exciting thing is back in 17-ish or so, our community supported an MLO, which is great and very appreciative to our community for doing that, which gives us roughly about $20 to $25 million a year for capital improvements. But I have to say that we have capital improvements, somewhere in the $700 million range. So it's going to take a long time for us to really do much of anything with that amount coming each year. What we are very optimistic about is the fact that we have an opportunity for a no tax or a tax neutral bond opportunity for this community to really reinvest in D11 and make strong schools as this community thrives and gets stronger. Right now, we're simply going to be working with our community to ask to maintain the current taxes that are coming to us, for another bond cycle, which would generate roughly $350 million for the first phase. We kind of 2 phases, and we've kind of prioritized improvements accordingly. Again, this would not increase any taxes for families in Colorado Springs. It's what's just currently, coming to District 11 right now. But with some of the Biden administration's infrastructure rebuilds, which a lot of that's going to be heavily focused on K-12, this is not just a Colorado Springs problem, I should mention. The nation's schools, kind of like the nation's bridges, are in the same condition. A lot of schools across the country are facing the same reality we are, which is why the Biden administration is looking at opportunities which is going to allow us to probably even maximize more with the taxes, with some of the incentives that he'll be passing into, his administration would be passing into the nation's infrastructure bill, which again will bring millions of dollars into communities for K-12. We also were able to take care of some of our capital improvements with the first round of our ESSER money, particularly our HVAC systems. Obviously, that was a big one for COVID, but with district like ours, and we had to upgrade some of our HVAC facilities anyways, that was a great opportunity for us to leverage some of the federal funds and not put that onto the local tax burden as well. So again, really trying to be strong stewards of every penny that we receive here in District 11. And I would just say that, this is coming up on the November ballot. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on in District 11, and I started with this, is that these are your schools. Whether you have kids in our district or not, if you have a house in our district, when a district thrives, your home values are very, very protected. And we all see what's kind of happening with home values right now. That inflation will somehow, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's crazy. But we know that we want to make sure we're staying good stewards, but we want you to be informed. So what can you do? I would say that if on your tables you have a sheet with a QR code on there, and if you scan that QR code, you can get into the nuts and bolts of our academic plan and our facilities plan. And so a lot of your questions that you might have really get into the details will probably get answered there. I think we also have an FAQ, Deborah, on some of that as well. So you can see a lot of answers to some of the questions that others have had, as well as spreading the word and the opportunity. So if you have this, sharing that link even with your neighbors, your colleagues, et cetera, that's going to be critically important. But we know that we're going to need the support of this community for District 11 to continually thrive and grow with this city. And I can assure you, as your superintendent and as the Board of Education here, I don't think, and I've shared this with Sean several times, to have that kind of marriage between a superintendent and a board is rare. You know, that we're all on the same page, really oriented to what is best for this community. And when we have different perspectives, we have great opportunities to work through those, all trying to get to the same outcome, maybe just different entry points. But this is one aspect that as a board and as an administration, we are so tightly aligned to what needs to happen for this community. And we know that we want to be that strong, viable option for families here in Colorado Springs. So with that, I just want to, again, thank you for your time to share a little bit of information on what's happening with District 11. And, you know, I can field any questions that you might have. Sean could field some questions. And if it's really specific, I can make sure that I can get your contact information, because we have individuals who are really granular with a lot of this information as well. So thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for being here today. And I'll take questions. Yes, sir. Yeah, yep, please use the mic. Thank you.
Because we're recording this, we're going to try and use the mic if you guys have questions. I know that it's very detailed. There's a lot of details online about the facilities master plan, and that's only half of the other part, which is the academic master plan. But I know there's already a lot of rumor and conversation out there about they're closing this school and this one's going to go away and all that kind of stuff. Can you talk at least to some degree about some of the facilities and how the facilities master plan is going to impact some of the schools that are around the district?
So, you know, it can be a little bit of a chicken and egg, but they go hand in hand. When we talk to our community about some of those unique academic pathways that they wanted, let's just take STEM for an example. A STEM classroom looks completely different than your traditional 50 by 50, you know, core instructional classroom. You have to have different technology, could be science labs, et cetera. So we know that we're going to have to retrofit some of these unique academic pathways into our existing brick and mortar and footprint. And so that's one aspect that will be happening. The other aspect that you're asking about, Stu, is conversations that we've had with our community over the past year, and that is bringing out scenarios to our community. And if you know me, I'm never going to come to you with a blank slate. We're going to come to you with some thought ideas on paper that are not set in stone, but we have to start the conversation somewhere. And you can imagine, if I'm talking about, you know, your student's school as one that might need to get repurposed because it's at 80% of its ability to be repaired, super costly, we might have to flatten it and rebuild it. Well, there's emotion behind that, particularly when you start talking about high schools, okay? Those alumni associations are pretty tough, you know, they're pretty strong. But there's history, like I said, there's legacy. West, you know, architecturally, it's one of the iconic, you know, schoolhouses right here in Colorado Springs. We knew going into that conversation, because structurally, there are some danger spots that we're going to have to address with that school. At the same time, architecturally, and where it's located in the very artsy west side corridor off of Colorado there, we need to protect that integrity of that architecture too. So how do we find a win-win? So we knew before we even engaged in deep conversations, we went to them with some mock drawings, architectural drawings, to say, here's how we can find a both and. Here's how we can structurally keep West. Here's how we can preserve architecture, either visually from the outside and or incorporate its original footprint into a new facade that when you walk in, let's say the grand archway is now the entrance to the office or to the library or something like that. So it's there still, right? Very, very important that we look at that. But at the end of the day, folks, I just, again, being very transparent, we won't need every school. There are going to be several schools that we're going to have some conversations about. So, for example, one of the conversation points that we had was looking at Queen Palmer and Taylor Elementary School and those two campuses. And can we find ways to create greater efficiencies with those two campuses by merging them together, creating a little bit larger footprint of an elementary school at the Galileo Middle School, which again is a stone's throw away from 3 other middle schools in that area, And then we merge a couple of middle schools to make one larger middle school. Because, and I'll tell you, I've always been a critic of K-8s and or small middle schools. Because once you get out of elementary, you get introduced to electives, and that starts triggering, hey, this is what I want to do when I grow up. When you're in a K-8 school, and it works, Harvard did a pretty good study on K-8 models in very homogeneous and solid middle income or above communities. K-8s really do well. They don't do well if you're not in that very unique demographic, like very specific demographic. And I would say culturally, they have found in their studies that it works well for a lot of Latinx families or families that have expanded, students that span maybe a K-8 in birth, right? So they can all be in one spot. And that was just specifically what they shared in some of their cultural research from their study years ago. But we're going to have those conversations. Can every campus remain open? Likelihood is it's not. I don't want to kid ourselves or feel like we're pulling fast ones on this community. We're going to have those conversations. But we can do that still and protect the integrity of each unique program. So, what is unique to Queen Palmer, what's unique to Taylor that we can still converge into one space, one learning community still, but still have that value add and return back to that community. So those are the conversations that we started to have. We'll re-engage our community again when we come back in August. We did some engagements in the fall or in the late spring, and then now that we can come back more so in person as well, we'll start having more of those conversations. But we won't see any of those physical changes of school mergers and things of that nature for another year, okay, at the earliest. So we've got some time, but it's also going to go quick, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's how we're managing some of that. Yes, please. Oh.
Hi, my name's Daisha, and I'm with Trace Church. So I don't know what everybody's coming from, but our, COSILOVEYOU has facilitated this relationship we have with one D11 school. So my question's a little bit narrow to us, but I'm also curious if it replicates. So we have this relationship with the school, and with all of your master planning in mind, what would you say are some of the most impactful projects we could do just in our little world, our one relationship with one D11 school? Or is there anything you would advise us not to do? So facilities, we end up doing a lot of facilities kind of projects, just helping with things. But, we're just working with the maintenance guy there on the individual campus. Do we need to be involving the district's facilities management? Or is it okay to just do these little things? We don't want to waste energy either or time. Tell us where we can have the most impact on these schools in just one-on-one relationships.
Sure, yeah. So thank you, and yeah, it might be unique to your church, but you all probably have some unique partnering opportunities that you've done with our schools. Now, I will say this. When it comes to the facilities piece, because there are some moving parts in the facilities, what I wouldn't want a church to do or a partner to do is say, we're going to get a lot of folks together and we're going to really do a campus beautification project here when that campus is closing in a year, right? So I would say definitely Terry Seaman is the individual that I would say is going to be a good point of contact for you right now on the facility side of things. So if that's of interest to you to do those campus beautifications or courtyard beautification projects in partnerships with our schools, talk with Terry about any of that. On the academic side, for example, we have a church that does a lot of our K-1 reading programs. They do a breakfast sponsorship and they give away books and that kind of a thing. Carol Gates right now is our point of contact. We hired a brand new deputy superintendent who will be starting with us in August as she transitions from her district in Texas. But until then, our director for curriculum and instruction, Ms. Carol Gates, would be our point of contact for any of the academic partnering opportunities that you want to do. So if it's about reading, book drives, tutoring, those are things that you would want to engage. That's who you'd want to engage with. And then lastly, if your church is looking to do more of a generalist approach, or your community that you might be affiliated with, could be your place of work as well as worship, and you want to do a generalist approach and just say, we want to bring volunteers. Luann DeCleva is the guru of volunteers. I will say that's another flagship of ours. We have millions of volunteer hours each year. I cannot thank our community enough for how much they volunteer in district. I've never seen that in a district. So this community really loves at schools. So Luann DeCleva is who you want to contact if you want to do a more generalist approach and just have volunteers for any project that we might earmark for you. She could help steer you in that direction. Yeah, sure.
I know we've got a couple of folks from Mitchell. Mitchell's an example of one school in the district, I think amongst a few others, that you guys are kind of changing the model of how that school is serving its student body, its families, the neighborhood around it. Can you talk a little bit more about whether it's Mitchell specifically or maybe some of the others that are kind of in that pathway, how you guys are developing kind of this community school model and maybe its impact on the district or some of the families and neighbors?
Thank you, Sue. Great question. I'll answer that by just telling you all briefly. Before I accepted a position here, going in the interview process, I flew down here on my own dime, and I wanted to find out. I know who I am. I know my core values, and I literally got into an Uber, said, "Take me to the closest library," and unbeknownst to me, I still don't know the name of the library. It's the one out by the Walmart off of Platt by Mitchell High School. There's a library over there, and there's a storage facility place over there. So I sat in there for about an hour, and I just observed people. I watched a lot of developmentally delayed adults coming in to the library, having community service time and reading and checking out books. I talked to a couple of the staff there. I walked the Mitchell community not knowing that that was Mitchell. And I remember going up to the kind of Kissing Camels area, Coronado area, and it's like, okay, every city, river, bridge, whatever it is, there's a divide, okay? And so we've got the tale of two cities happening here, and Mitchell has always had a special place in my heart. Not only is that where I kind of came from growing up, but those are always the schools I worked in, right? And when I took the position, Mitchell was squarely on my radar, and they knew it. And I said, we created Mitchell. All the challenges that are happening at Mitchell, we as a district created that school. This is not to blame teachers, not blaming kids. We should have done something different years ago at Mitchell. And there are other aspects of structural inequities that I uncovered my first year here with Mitchell, and I said, we're immediately changing these practices. Like Mitchell was a school I wanted to make sure we had all eyes on and that we were going to rise up. Because there's so much potential in that school. That community, as a community, I pushed our mayor, our undersheriff, and others when I first got here saying, I know what I can do within my sphere of influence in K-12. What are you doing about the community? What are you doing when my kids are getting jumped into gangs, walking 2 blocks to school, or selling drugs, or being trafficked? How are you helping my kids? Right? I can't control that. I've heard about what you did in North Nevada, and you just moved the blight further southeast. Right? These are the things that I really push as a superintendent. I know my space, K-12 academics, but I'm a public leader here. The city is something that we contribute to as an institution of K-12 industry. So we need to keep pushing pressure to say, you got to do something here because we can only control so much. In Mitchell, what we can control is what's going on in those 4 walls every single day. And we had many attempts at the local level to pass an innovation plan that the staff had to vote and approve, to doing something different, to getting different outcomes. And 2 times it failed prior to me coming here. So my first year was just learning about the district. I wasn't going to take any drastic actions. My second year here, I really pushed for the staff with my guidance to say, here's what needs to happen. Figure out how you all can be empowered to make a decision to doing something different at Mitchell, now that I have an opportunity to have put some eyes on it and hear some recommendations. It failed a third time, okay? And at that point, the board tasked me, you will take over Mitchell High School. Paraphrasing here, but put together a plan for Mitchell High School. And, for me, part of that was I had to address the lack of support that we were providing to Mitchell centrally. So I had to make some tough decisions on staffing that should have been doing some different things years ago. That's never fun, but that's part of my job. The latest piece that I know is out in the media is that I fired all the staff at Mitchell High School. It's tough to hear that, but it's not entirely the accurate way I would put it. They are still D11 employees. They were just no longer, they needed to reapply for their assignment. Because what we're asking folks to do at Mitchell may not be what people signed up to do who are sitting at Mitchell. I need you to work extra hours. That could be Saturday academies. That could be extended PD. That would be break academies, working during spring break when you would typically be off. And I can't mandate this kind of work, nor can I just expect everybody at Mitchell is going to be absolutely okay with this direction. You need to get the right people on the bus. And so out of respect for all the staff at Mitchell High School and their integrity, they were released from their assignment, still a D11 employee, but knowing where we're going with Mitchell, I need you to recommit. I need to know that you're willing to step up to bat and swing for the fences for these kids. And it's going to take way more than what we've been doing at Mitchell currently, okay? And I have the greatest empathy for what that means for staff. I was just married, brand new baby, and I was also a victim of No Child Left Behind, restructuring, AYP rules, and we moved my school when I was a principal to pre-K through 3 early literacy, closed down another school. I lost my job because of seniority. I know what it feels like to not have an assignment and to have to keep a roof over your head and put food on the table. It's a tough decision I had to make as a superintendent. But I knew I would figure something out. But I guarantee you, a good percentage of those families won't be able to figure out much of anything in life if we don't do right by them. And that is my commitment to this community, not just Mitchell, but every one of our campuses. I have high expectations. Like I said, I came from a Mitchell. I had every odd stacked against me in this world. Whew, did not know I was going to go here today. But I did it, right? But I had a lot of folks leaning into me. And I can only imagine the ones I couldn't see behind the screen or behind the curtain who were helping out, organizationally or structurally. Well, that's what we're doing here at Mitchell High School. And I know those are tough decisions. But if I did nothing as a superintendent and just let Mitchell be what it is, then I should be fired. But I refuse to allow a school to get to that place. And so not every campus is going to go through what Mitchell is going through. But in our academic master plan and our facilities plan, changes will happen, right? And we know, like I started with the joke, change is hard in K-12. But we know that if we maintain status quo, we're not going to get the results that we desire. So I am deeply committed to the Mitchell community, to making Mitchell that flagship high school that it can be, as well as all the pathway feeders. We're having conversations with the elementaries and the middle school to ensure that we have that academic programming all aligned. You're going to see when you click that icon in the FMP or the AMP presentation, our CTE flagship programs, Mitchell's front and center with that. They're going to have both the pre-medical pathway as well as the home building partnerships the trades as well. And let me tell you, there's no shame in being a plumber or a welder or anything like that. Those folks are making some serious livable wages. And if you've been to Home Depot lately and you look at those lumber prices, right? I mean, we're going to be here for a while. But those are very, very good pathways for kids. Because what we're seeing now, and again, this is not to get into a rabbit hole, but I got 2 kids in college. I don't know if you've seen the prices of tuition lately. It's getting astronomical, right? It's getting out of reach for many, many families. And so we're seeing more community college or going straight into industry first to make some money to help pay for college. So we've got to get kids ready for college, for a career, and just general life readiness. And Mitchell and every one of our high schools can do that in District 11, and we're proud to say that in District 11. Any other closing questions? I know I probably kept you a little bit past our time.
Guys, feel free to ask him. This is a good thing. He's not afraid of the tough questions.
Yeah, I'm an open book. I'm a very short read. What you see is what you get. I'll give you the truth. Yes, sir. Oh, let me give you the mic because we're gotta let the audience in the Facebook world hear it.
Real quick, I appreciate your conversation, but one of the questions that I'm thinking about is, I'm always thinking about relevance. And relevance gives us a point of reference to move something. How has your background, and you touched on it, but it really sparked something. How has your background prepared you for what you're doing now?
Another question I wasn't expecting. I know, I appreciate it. I will say this. We were talking just before we started a little bit about my background. I was that kid that you might not want in your class. I'm just going to say that. So thank you to my teachers in K-12. Had some tough situations in my family I had to negotiate through, and unfortunately was making a lot of bad decisions in my life. Literally all the way up until I was academically dismissed from college. Right? Not a proud story I tell, but I tell it to young people all the time, because you take off the suit and tie and the letters behind my name, you have no idea what I had to go through to get here today. But for me, my relevance and kind of my why, my purpose came when I hit that rock bottom place after making a lot of bad decisions. And I was working at the YMCA and after school program, and I would do homework help, and then after homework help, we would play games. And Reggie, a little 10-year-old African-American guy, he was there all the time, and he was like my go-to. And one day after playing foosball, which he had like 8 arms, he could hit all those paddles, he said, "Man, I wish I had a dad like you at home." I mean, that just rocked my world. And, he had no clue who I really was and all the bad things that I had, decisions I had made. I'm like, why would he want me as a dad? If you knew me, would you? But it was that moment in my life that we've probably all experienced at some level where you just kind of understand your meaning, your purpose. And I said, if I'm using him as a paycheck and he's using me as a dad, Michael, what is wrong with you? Figure this out. And so I also learned about child protection because he was in an abusive family, not unlike some of the stuff I had to go through. Did not know that agency existed, but I had to live and endure through that as well. And I lost contact with Reggie. But Reggie always remained in my heart. And I knew that Reggie, I wanted to not only help this young man, but I knew I needed to address the family, and I knew the family was living in a community that had a lot of issues too. So what could I do to do that? And social work is where I went. And became a social worker, did a lot of community-based social work practice, mental health practice. I worked in corrections, hospitals, community mental health nonprofits. And I was asked to start a program in St. Paul Public Schools for African-American males in grades 3 through 6 to help reduce the disproportionate referrals into special education. And that was my goal, is to look at some of the emotional regulation, strategies, because these kids were getting disproportionately diagnosed with IEPs and everything like that. And so what could I do to help keep them out of special ed and keep them in mainstream? And what I found, two things. One, the program was extremely successful. It was an Afrocentric approach, which meant they were validated as young black men in spaces where they were not necessarily welcomed, if you will. And I also looked at mini-me's. I was like, where was this when I was a young kid? And when they left the program and they went off to middle school, things just started falling apart for them again. And that's what woke me up to this thing we call public education. Because I thought I was going to be, I thought I was going to have a mental health practice when I got older. That's what I wanted to do. But when I saw the structure of K-12 and I understood what it did to me as a young kid in the system of K-12 and what it was continually doing for this next cohort of kids coming through, I said, I gotta do whatever I need to do to fix this. I want to work in schools. And so that's what propelled me into schools. So starting off as a school-based social worker, I also worked at the central office doing a lot of equity work, diversity, equity, inclusion work. I was an elementary principal, junior high principal, assistant superintendent, the gamut of roles. But then personally, my lived experience is something I share with young people all the time. Because, I think we all have stories. And you all each have stories that bring you here today. And I think many of our young people, when they hear, they see us on the surface as one person, and they think, oh yeah, you don't understand. But then when they hear your story, and they make that connection to you, that's where the magic happens. So it happens in our classrooms with teachers all the time, but it also happens with each and every one of you as community members in our school or supporting our schools. The importance that kids can see and hear lived experiences that we have had to help usher them to their success is going to be that relevant connection. I'll never forget when I was a junior high principal and I would tell this to my staff, when a student comes to you and says they're not feeling this, there's no relevance, right? They will write you off. So how can we, as a district, be relevant to this community? Folks, this community is changing. Whether we want it to or not, as Sam Cooke would say, change is going to come, right? It's here. And we can embrace the change or let it take us over like a tidal wave. But change is here and will always be here. And if we are staunch in who we are and not able to remain relevant, we'll get written off. And again, as a board, as a superintendent and administration, on behalf of administration in D11, we want to lead that change. We want to be on the front edge of that change. And we know being out front, we're going to take the first blows. And trust me, we've had a few, okay? We've had a few. And, but again, that's important, I think, for this community to understand that even in times of challenge, like COVID, or even in times of racial and social and civic unrest in this country that we've experienced for, the past couple of years as well, right? There's relevance to K-12 education. That's civics 101, right? How do we help our students understand that? Being involved in your community, right? Long answer to your question, but I believe that's my relevance to who I am personally and who I am professionally to do what we're doing here. Yeah, yes, sir.
So as I've partnered with schools for many different years, many different schools in D11. The easiest way for us to connect is facilities. Have you heard that conversation? Churches can help with some of those things. One of the things that I think every group in here loves also is staff care, to make sure that your staff are cared for, because they're the ones that are engaging with students on a daily basis. So if they're cared for well, then they'll teach our kids well. I own a coffee shop across from one of the schools, and so keeping the teachers caffeinated, I think, is part of my role with them doing what they're doing. However, I feel like there's oftentimes been a barrier, and I'm not saying that Safety is a huge portion of it, between churches, businesses, and those kind of things engaging with students, and really being able to develop kids in our community. And I understand the safety things and those kind of things that are involved, but I'm thinking of your Reggie story, and what are maybe some innovative ways that you're hoping or you're dreaming for District 11 to see more engagement with students? And let's still do all the safety things, but just make sure, that kind of element. And I feel like from the stories that I know, those are very limited for us to engage and really develop students to be fathers for the fatherless or whatever it might be. And so do you have some innovative ideas or some thoughts around there?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'll say thank you for acknowledging your support for the care of staff. And that's something that I hope our staff hears me say frequently, that, I really love our staff, genuinely, and I want to make sure that they're taken care of, particularly when we've had such a crazy year this past year. In terms of, I'll just kind of piggyback off to the relevancy. Academic content in isolation means nothing to kids, right? They're always, I'll quote my daughter, "Why do I need calculus?" I might not know how to answer that question because I might have the same question. No, I'm just kidding. But, they want to see, how does this apply? Whether I'm going up to college, whether I'm going to go into a workforce. So I think, one of the things that, Sean and I have actually talked a little bit about when we think about some of our campuses that we may need to repurpose. Is this an opportunity to partner with some of our small businesses to create student enterprises? So you can go into your core content and then apply it into a student enterprise. So kids run your coffee shop. Our students run your coffee shop, right? That's one aspect that we've been envisioning out. I even have a proposal from one of our staff in our district who has developed, literally drawn out blueprints, room usage, everything for a campus of bringing in student enterprise systems where, so think of, is it Lincoln Elementary, where, is that Goat Patch or whatever, in that sandwich shop, coffee shop? That was our old school. Think about that concept of a school that's literally still the same footprint of Lincoln School, but those being supported by students running those boutique kind of businesses there, and they're applying math, reading, science, whatever it might be, right? That's something that we're really excited about. That is something that I think will come to fruition in some scale in District 11. And then in terms of the barriers, and yes, partnering with school systems, and I've heard it in every district I've been in, can be a challenge because we're dealing with people under the age of 18, and we have data privacy and those kind of things, and we have mandated reporting and all those kind of aspects. But as an individual or an agent or a business or an agency, once you're cleared with us, you're good to go. And so we just want to make sure that we can streamline that process. And that's good feedback for me with Luann, as we have people saying, hey, I would love to lean in, but man, it's so much red tape. Okay, so that's good for me to understand, because if we can make that, still obviously safe, but streamlined processes that, again, we don't put up structural barriers for our community to come into our schools, then I think folks will be more willing and able, obviously, to participate. So two things, an idea that's really percolating right now, as well as good feedback from me as the superintendent to address some of our partner agreement contracts and processes. And thank you for the caffeine. Yes, sir.
I just briefly went on your site to look at the master plan. I noticed the rebuild schools. That's kind of obvious what would be happening there. But the question I have, especially with our church partnering with one of the schools that's going to be repurposed, what does that look like for those schools? If you can kind of lean in and share more about that.
So the question about repurposing schools right now is one that we'll be engaging with our community this fall. And so if there's a school that's currently slotted for repurposing, we want to hear from our community as to what could that space be utilized for. So, I've had conversations with a couple of our large nonprofits, for example, and I gave one example earlier around childcare. There's a lack of quality childcare, in this area. And so let's just talk about Queen Palmer, okay? Queen Palmer has a lot of community support. So that is one that's being discussed right now and what that would mean. So yes, there's interest from both higher ed as well as some large nonprofits on that particular property, okay? There's nothing set in stone. We haven't penned the deal that this is absolutely going to happen, but we want to bring these scenarios to our community as kind of part 2 of the engagement to say, we engaged you last spring about here's where we're at, and based upon all these, FCI scores, this is still the direction we're going to go. Now we need to have the next layer of, and what should we do with this space? I do not, and I want to be careful how I say this, because but in the past, we've lost buildings to competition, for a lack of a better term, okay? Some of the non-D11 charters, for example. And based upon how our state laws are written, which is very unique as an outsider coming in, they can just take the building, right? And so we've got to make sure, and I'm not anti-charter. I know that's probably not the most popular thing to say either as a public superintendent, but they are public schools. And I know where we're at. We're still in a choice state. But one of the things that we are proud to do is authorize charter schools. And we have 6 of our own that we sponsor, we underwrite, if you will. And we want to do more of that. We are actually expanding our whole, if you think from a business standpoint, every successful business, large-scale business like us, has a research and development wing, if you will, an R&D wing. And we need the equivalent of that in education. And we are starting that with one of our principal supervisors next year. And all the R&D in our charter schools and our innovation and pathway schools are all going to go into that portfolio. And we're going to start launching a lot of innovative projects. This is actually, going back to your question too, Brandon, this is where we can start piloting some of these unique opportunities with the community and our schools in a very different way, because we'll have a smaller scale to do so. But we'll have these conversations, Kevin, and asking our community, is it a student enterprise space? Should we give it to the libraries and let them open up another library, a satellite library there? Should it be a park? Those are the conversations that have yet to be determined, but we will have similar engagement sessions such as this with our community so that we get the best thinking. Because one of the things I tell our staff in our community, we should never be criticized by the community to say, I never had an opportunity to bring a perspective. Now, certainly there's 500,000 people or so here, and we're not going to talk to everybody, but we want to create these forums and opportunities for them to bring their perspectives to the table. And at the end of the day, as a superintendent, I have to make a decision. And I've learned in the past 15 months, you can never please everybody. And if I had that ability, I wouldn't have the title of being a superintendent. But we know that we're going to have to make some decisions. But I think that will be done in partnership with our community. And if the majority of our community is saying, hey, we want another park because we believe that you can use it as a science outdoor education classroom during school hours, and now I have a spot, in the community, where's the green space by Queen Palmer? I mean, that's like a New York school, right? You got concrete everywhere, asphalt everywhere. So great opportunities for us to really partner with our community to make some of those decisions. Yes. I'll take one more question, Steve. Okay.
I've worked with Mitchell High School quite a bit in the past couple of years. And as you acknowledge, there are quite a few English language learners at that school in particular. Many of them come to the U.S. as a high school student, and within 4 years, it's very, very challenging for them to master and become fluent and to do well on tests. Especially if they have no one else in their family who speaks English. What are your plans for helping those kids to do well academically despite those challenges?
That's a great question, Lisa. And I would say, in our region, we are forecasting, Talana, who leads our English language learner program in District 11, is forecasting a continued surge of ELL students. What we have there is a Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol, SIOP model for ELL, which is a very robust approach to getting kids accelerated into acquiring English skills at a faster rate. Extensive PD will be added to Mitchell High School staff so that, for example, when I was in an elementary equivalent where I had a high librarian population and Spanish-speaking population, high immigrant refugees, it was mandatory that I made every lesson plan has to have language objectives. Because what I found when you're in a community like Mitchell, it's not only the formal EL students, but you also have many students who don't have academic English. They have community English, but they don't have academic English. Like, how do we engage that at that level? And again, that's an ability that we have to kind of have what I used to say are EL type learners. Because what works for EL works for everyone, but what works for everyone doesn't necessarily work for EL. And so that's going to be a very similar approach, so that we're incorporating those language objectives across curricular disciplines and also aligning our academics so that we can have greater continuity, similar to an IB profile that you'll see at Palmer, so that you're incorporating social studies into ELA, or you're incorporating math with science, so that they're reinforcing those skills across disciplines in the same genre, in the same lesson. So those are some of the strategies that we're doing there. And I would say that, as we are projecting with larger numbers of EL enrollments, Talana is also going through a new 7-year cycle of looking at our EL curriculum. Now, I will say at the younger levels, in the area like our Wilsons and things of that nature, we have a very high exit rate. So our elementary program is very, very successful, one of the highest I've seen in my K-12 experience. So, my hat's off to Talana and the EL staff throughout the district. But to your point, and this is, I think, bigger than a D11 conversation, when we're looking at SAT scores, for example, okay, college readiness, acquisition benchmarks, and English isn't your primary language, and you are at maybe a newcomer status, okay? Maybe you have a year behind you, and you're supposed to be proficient, by 11th grade. Not going to happen, right? And the test is in English. So we've got a lot of other challenges that are beyond our control that tie into our ability of saying a student is ready or proficient or not. What we are finding is that we have a strong partnership with, because when you look at students who are in ELL who come into Mitchell versus those who come into, let's say, Doherty, they are also coming from home countries at Mitchell that have more challenges than those going into Palmer, for example. I think I said Doherty, but Palmer, I think, has our next highest load. So you might have a lot more Russian or European immigrants coming into Palmer, where you have others coming in from other countries at Doherty who might not have some of the same infrastructures and support, so they can catch on quicker at Palmer than they can at Doherty or at Mitchell. What is also happening that we're finding, though, which is a great partnership, is that once they are leaving Mitchell, going into adult basic ed at Roy J. Watson, and I know years ago that was a very controversial decision that our board had to lead through. Roy J. Watson is our fastest growing campus in District 11. We actually had to take one of our charter school properties back from a non-D11 authorized charter school because we needed more room. It is again, an example of how we can individualize instruction and have a small school model, like the Institute for School Alliance out in New York. They take large schools and break them into unique learning communities by kind of unique academic features. Well, that's what Roy J. Watson does. And I'm telling you, kids who aren't finding success in any one of our campuses, they are thriving at that campus and becoming college and career ready right off the bat. So we're excited to have that partnership happening too, to extend that support for some of our EO families. Well, Mr. Davis, I know I've taken probably 40 more minutes of your time and the community's time, but again, I can't thank you enough for your commitment to D11 and your continued commitment as we look to rebuild, reimagine, and recommit to District 11. So thank you so much. Proud to be here as your superintendent.
Thanks. Yep. Let me just say a couple of quick things. One, if you haven't discovered this already just in this conversation, my experience with Dr. Thomas as well as his team, especially if you're from a local church, I know there's always this kind of feeling like, are they going to be open, or can we do this? Can we partner up with them? You have a friend and you have an advocate, certainly in us, but I've experienced nothing but open doors from our friends at D11 for churches to come alongside families. I mean, that's why we're all here, right? It's because we want to see families get better. We want to see them win. We want to see their kids have a bright future or a bright outlook. We want to see strong families and communities. That's why they're here. That's why you're here. So there's a lot of open doors, and it's good to be a trusted partner. I don't think I'm overstating it or overstepping my bounds by saying COSILOVEYOU's worked hard to try and be a good trusted partner with D11 and several of other school districts. Many of your churches have as well, and it's just good to just continue to build that trust. And so for us to show up with a willingness to listen, and if you've paid attention to it, you've heard, all of us are thinking about how can we go beyond kind of the facilities support, the things to help do some cosmetic work, maybe even taking it a step farther and caring for teachers, which I know several of you guys in your churches do. But are there things that we can do to kind of get life on life, kind of get in the grain in the day-to-day stuff with the Reggies that are out there? And the answer is yes. There's a lot of good opportunities to do so. And I think, one of the things that I've learned with what we do as schools is, it doesn't take an army of people to make a difference at a school. It takes about 5 who can just show up consistently and just be a ready, trusting, loving face. And so I think for those of you guys who are, in a church and you're trying to think about how can we kind of get some life-on-life experience, find 5 people who can just show up. And they have to probably show up with a plan, and they have to pass the background check and all that kind of stuff. But the biggest thing is just showing up. Here's what I'll say, and this is for those of you who are watching online as well. First of all, we're going to post a link to the recording of this. So for anybody who missed it, or if you feel like you want to pass this information along, make it available in some other way, we'll pass that on, that link along. We'll also follow up with the names of several of the folks that Dr. Thomas mentioned to you in the D11 administration. I'll just put an additional plug for Luann DeCleva, who's become a great partner of mine, of ours at COSILOVEYOU. She's just been a wonderful door opener for a lot of different kinds of community engagement opportunities at schools all across District 11. So we'll make sure that that's in. If you guys have questions that COSILOVEYOU can help with about how we can just, if you're hitting a wall, if you're looking for ideas, if you're trying to connect with a practitioner who's done something around the country that you're thinking about doing here, chances are good that somebody else has already thought of it and is already doing it. And so we can connect you perhaps with some of those folks who are thinking about doing some of those things, whether it's a program like a reading and mentorship program, after-school clubs, ELL programs at schools, all those kinds of things. There's some great work being done in partnership between schools and their broader communities really around the country. I'll also say this last part, Dr. Thomas and I were just talking about this at the beginning. The State Department of Education in Colorado is now actually focusing this coming academic year on what are called Family School Community Partnerships, FSCP. Acronyms all over, right, Deborah? So if you're interested in finding out more about what that looks like, it's actually an area of focus for the whole state. D11, obviously, as one of our larger school districts in the state, is going to be focusing on that as well. And so we want to try and empower you guys to do some more of that work that falls in line with what our State Department of Education is going to be doing. So feel free to reach out to me or to Corey. We also have a staff person, Gina, who does a lot of work with our schools program. So, guys, thanks for being here. Great to have you. Hope you take this information. And I think Deborah, maybe you and I were talking about this. If you're interested in making this information available, or you want somebody from the district to kind of show up and talk about some more of this stuff with some of the folks kind of in your arena, please let us know, and we can try and figure out how to make that happen. So, thanks, guys. Have a great week.